17. No matter how many women Elvis Presley has had in the past and no matter how many he may have in the future, it is clear there is only one woman to whom he will always have a strong romantic attraction, and that woman is petite, sophisticated Priscilla Bewley Presley. They both had genuine love for each other, and even though she left Presley for another man, no other man has had as lasting an influence in her growth as Elvis Presley. After all the glossy fan magazine pictures and stories are digested, it must be remembered that Presley virtually raised Priscilla from the time she was a 15-year-old schoolgirl until they finally split in an explosion of anger, selfishness and misunderstanding. The Presley groupies who chart both lives from day to day, often theorize that eventually, when Presley is 60 and Priscilla is 50, after a lifetime of doing their own thing apart, they may reunite. It is not an altogether bizarre theory. There is an incredible bond of loyalty between them, as well as their beautiful daughter. Neither will permit a word to be said against the other. Presley met Priscilla in Germany, in the closing months of his army service. Red recalls, I had got back to Memphis before Elvis. I was sort of causing a bit too much trouble in the bars, and I was getting nowhere fast. I left soon after a brawl in the Beck's Beer Bar with some bully they called the Mexican Bull. One of the customers who watched Red's demolition of the Mexican Bull that night was Joe Esposito, the sharp-witted recruit from Chicago who was later to pick up with Presley and become one of the boys. Diamond Joe was impressed with Red's action and in later years was only too happy to let him head up the Royal Bodyguard. Presley returned to Fort Dix, New Jersey, on March 3, 1960. Colonel Tom Parker had stoked the fires of publicity to hysterical proportions. Only World War III could have kept Presley off the front pages that day. Within a week, he was back in Graceland and had swapped his army boots for his blue suede shoes. Red, who was in Los Angeles at the time writing songs, soon made his way back to the Presley Mecca in Whitehaven. He had a girlfriend at the time, says Red, and I won't mention her name because what Elvis said to us all just might embarrass her, but he said, "It's about time I got a girl who was a bit more sharp." We didn't know what he meant, but after a while he kept on talking about this girl Priscilla he met in Germany after I left. When he told me she wasn't yet 15, I nearly had a heart attack. He assured me that this girl was different, much different from the average Memphis girl, and I was prepared to disbelieve him. Anyway, she had been introduced to him by a guy in special services by the name of Curry Grant. Elvis started to talk more and more about this girl as the year wore on, and I believe he even wrote her a letter, which I can tell you is almost unheard of for Elvis. A lot of things were happening. We started our movie schedules, kicking off with GI Blues, and we would always bring girls over to him. It's not that we were procuring, but he was still a little shy about making the first approach. That night they would be in bed. That charm, man, it just dripped off him. But he still always got back to talking about Priscilla. We were having a lot of fun those days in Memphis, when we weren't in Hollywood. Sonny had joined the gang, and we were at Wimpy Adams Amusement Park riding the cars and the roller coasters, and we were skating like fools at the Rainbow Skating Rink. Despite the many women Presley was seeing, he always harked back to the little girl in Germany. He made several long-distance telephone calls to her, and to the boys, Red, Sonny, Lamar Fike, Charlie Hodge, his cousin Gene Smith, Ellen Fortis, and a new addition, the Yankee, Joe Esposito. It seemed their boss was finally in love. Presley arranged for Priscilla, daughter of an Air Force captain who was later to become a colonel, to visit him over Christmas, 1960. Presley wanted to see just whether he was indeed in love, or whether he was just smitten by a fresh and beautiful schoolgirl. Sonny was at Graceland at the time. Elvis went to the airport alone to greet her, he says, and all the boys were in the living room at Graceland. We didn't know what to expect, but we were Southern boys, and a 15-year-old girl in Memphis was someone who giggled and talked about a boy's acne. Anyway, that afternoon, just before Christmas, he walks in with her. Man, she was everything he had said she was. She looked much older than 15, but not in a cheap way. She was very mature looking. She had been a child in the service and had lived all over. She knew nothing about men, hadn't any experience with them from what I know, but she seemed every bit as mature as all of us guys put together. Elvis had made arrangements with Priscilla's dad that his daughter would stay in Vernon's house. Vern was living with Dee in another house across from the back of Elvis's house at Graceland. There was a pasture and then Vern's house. The whole time she was there, about 2 weeks, it was a very quiet event. Dinners at home, small parties with the boys, and I guess we went to the amusement park and the movies. But no wild times. Priscilla had a very easy way with her. She had a nice easy laugh. She was neither overawed with Elvis and the boys nor uppity. She was just right. Man, she fit in perfectly. There was no doubt that Elvis had got himself a great chick. After Priscilla returned to Germany, Presley polled the boys on their reaction to her. It was the early days of the Memphis Mafia, and it was a lot more democratic than in years to come. Members of the entourage didn't necessarily say what they thought Presley wanted to hear. However, to a man they agreed that Priscilla was the greatest thing since fried chicken. Presley was quite impressed at their reaction. Sonny remembers that Presley made up his mind he couldn't go on living in the States if she was going to live in Germany with her parents. He started making arrangements, says Sonny, to have her come back to the States. He spent a lot of time talking to her father on the telephone. Now Captain Bewley was a pretty smart customer. He wasn't suddenly going to let his daughter wander off and take up with a sex symbol, just like that. Elvis really had to pour it on. Elvis told her father that he needed her, loved her and would respect her in every way that her father wanted her respected. He told him that he would marry her one day, and he undertook to put her through school. He would tell us that Priscilla was the one he wanted, because he thought he deserved something better than the girls he was running around with in Hollywood. Presley finally won over Captain Bewley. It was decided that Priscilla would live with Vernon and Dee and that Presley would put her through school. The boys were out in force to meet her at the airport when she arrived, and Sonia remembers she looked even better the second time around. Red saw her soon after. I was in the kitchen at Graceland, and I saw her there. Wow, every bit as good as the build up. The great thing about her was her easy manners. You always felt easy with her. She did look a lot older than 15, and she spoke a lot older, very sophisticated. Priscilla was a Catholic, so Presley had her enrolled at the School of the Immaculate Conception, which stood on the corner of Park and Lamar Avenues. The boys used to call it Virginity Row. At the beginning of her school days, Presley would often drive her to school in one of his huge fleet of cars. For the South in those days, it was somewhat bizarre, but there was very little comment in the press. Once again the skilled hand of Colonel Tom Parker was felt. Red and Sonny are still amazed that more was not made of the romance by the press. Even the fan magazines trod fairly lightly. Colonel Tom convinced everybody that Priscilla was living with Vernon and Dee, and that absolutely everything was above board. As soon as Priscilla was old enough to drive, Presley bought her first a Corvair and then a lavender Chevy Sports Coupe. She lived in a mansion, she had the best schooling, everything money could buy, and the sex symbol of all sex symbols as her romancer. What more could she want? As the years went on and Priscilla's personality developed, she found there was much more in life than just riches. She realized, right up until 1972, a virtual prisoner in a gilded cage. Presley always kept Priscilla on a pedestal. It was like everything he does, says Sonny. He got what he wanted, put it away in storage, and went on to something else. Priscilla could have anything she wanted, but the thing she wanted most was Elvis. In the last couple of years she was with him, he was away from her 85% of the time. She wouldn't see him for 7 weeks at a time. Then they would spend the weekend together and then he was off again. She could buy all the clothes and jewels she wanted and Elvis would not have said a word, but she didn't want that. She was not a heavy spender when you think of other girls who have been around him. She just wanted a normal life. But toward the end, Elvis's life consisted of staying in bed all day getting swacked out of his head. There were times when we wouldn't see him for a week. He would just stay up in that room taking downers, watching television, and watching the closed-circuit television which covered the entire house. She didn't want that kind of life. Toward the end she wanted to do something with her days, get out and enjoy life. She didn't want to stay in a hotel room all day or the bedroom of Graceland all day, asleep. But in earlier days, Presley lived with genuine vibrancy, even if it was helped along by popping a Dexedrine here and there. He had a lovely, irresponsible lust for life that never seemed to be satisfied. He was romancing several ladies in Hollywood on his various movie assignments, and he would even play a little in Memphis. The Memphis Mafia hung out in the back room of a place called Chenault's. It was especially cordoned off for them and there was plenty of action. Red remembers that Presley couldn't care less about his various girlfriends knowing about each other, but he was always careful never to throw up anything in Priscilla's face. He says, any suggestion that he was playing around was fiercely denied by Elvis. Later on, when the gossip columnists started picking up stuff, a lot of which was true, he would just deny it outright and call it all publicity and lies. He was very convincing, because by the time the columnists got onto a story about a girl he was seeing, he would be back in Memphis, and he would turn it around that these columnists had him out with a girl while he was at Priscilla's side. When she was younger, I guess she swallowed it, not so much later on. But in those days when he was with her and not running around Hollywood, he was very attentive, very affectionate. Those early times at Graceland are thought of as in the life of the Memphis Mafia. Pray the best years Lay was making up to $3 million a year, and he was going to make sure it was spent on fun for him and the boys. Red and Sonny remember those years before he married Priscilla as Presley's cowboy period. It was the beginning of some very bizarre buying habits. Well, says Red with more than a hint of nostalgia in his voice, it started off with Elvis buying Priscilla a horse. Now she didn't have anyone to ride with, so Elvis bought his cousin Patsy Presley a horse so she could ride with her. Then he bought himself one, and when he saw us looking on forlornly at them riding horses, he decided we all should have horses. He bought every one of us a horse. Graceland had only 13 acres, and when Red once accidentally ran Presley down on horseback and dislocated cartilage in his chest, Presley decided it was time to get a special place for the horses so they could ride them without running each other down. He found a nice little place across the Mississippi border, not too far from Graceland. It was a beautiful estate of 150 rolling acres, owned by a local rancher named Jack Adams. He paid in excess of $500,000 for it. It had a gleaming lake with tributaries running off it and picturesque bridges, the works. Now, says Red, he decides we all should have chaps and cowboy hats, and we were going to be ranchers. We had to have cattle, so he bought some cattle that were developed by King Ranch. He didn't know how valuable they were, but they were really prime cattle. Now every ranch has to have a truck, so he bought a Dodge truck. Then all hell broke loose. He started buying trucks for everybody. All the boys, El Caminos, I think Sonny remembers the price they all had, these ranch trucks. Rancheros, Camaros. $97,000 worth of trucks in one buying spree. When word spread about this, there were truck salesmen lined up outside the ranch. He called the ranch Rising Sun. Outside of the place there was every kind of salesman in the world. We would try to stop him from walking outside, literally try to force him from going out there, unless one of us was with him, because sure as hell he would buy something from them, all cash. He would sign for it and say, "Give the bill to Ma Daddy." I remember one salesman there had a great big 3-stall truck you could haul horses in. Anyway, a guy comes down to survey the place, a very quiet kind of guy. He was just going about his business, and Elvis looks at this 3-haul truck that he had no use for. He said to this surveyor, who he had never laid eyes on before, "You like that truck?" The surveyor looks up sort of sleepy-eyed and says, "What?" Elvis just gestures to the salesman to make out a slip, and he gives it to the guy and says, "Take it, man. It's yours." The surveyor nearly dropped dead on the spot. I think he sold it for cash the next day. Sonny continues, Alan Fortas tells me of a funny anecdote. They are standing in front of the ranch, and all these truck salesmen are there. Elvis goes out with Alan Fortas. He looks at all these trucks, and he says to Alan, "Take your pick," pointing to these ranch trucks. Alan replies, "But I already have one." Elvis then looks across at a salesman, who he doesn't even know is the salesman. "Well, give it to him," and Alan says to him, patiently, "But he's got one, too." So Elvis looks at Alan as if he is nuts and says, "Well, hell, man, find some son of a bitch to give it to." It was going on like that all the time. Show him something and he would buy it for someone. Now it didn't stop there. The Memphis Mafia, dense strong, led by Red and Sonny, would be at the ranch all day, racing their horses, drag racing their ranch trucks, and keeping their spirits high with the little white pills Presley would generously dispense. But the tragedy was they had to go home at night and leave behind this fabulous toyland. Red relates, Elvis, when he was at the ranch, would stay in this very nice, very comfortable brick cottage in the northwest corner. Now for some reason one of the salesmen standing outside grabbed him and somehow sold him a trailer, not an ordinary trailer, a beautiful 3-bedroom trailer that was more a house than anything else. In those days, in the middle 60s, I guess it cost over $15,000. Well, that started it. We all got trailers. In no time he had bought 8 trailers, at a tremendous cost, and they were all lined up in a row. Then he had a guy come out and put concrete under them and connect gas lines to them to make them permanent. We all moved in. We stayed at the ranch for days at an end. Some of us moved our wives in. It really was sensational. We raced horses all day, played at target practice with all his guns. Elvis had a beautiful gold Palomino horse, which he called Sun. And to see him all pilled up riding that horse was like watching Lee Marvin on a horse in cat blue. It was a scream. Long before communes, man, says Sonny, Elvis wanted us to have a commune, a place where we could have all the fun in the world and not be bothered by anyone. He wanted to have a sort of Garden of Eden, just an ideal community. He was very happy there, and so were we. Red remembers that after the horse buying spree, the truck buying spree, and the trailer buying spree, Presley decided he needed a tractor. At first he got a small tractor, but that wasn't powerful enough. Then he got a full-size farm tractor. We would put a saddle on the tractor and ride it around like madmen. Often a rider would get bucked off his saddle, and we would all have to run after the tractor, which had suddenly become a driverless runaway machine. We were all pilled up and slightly crazy, but there was nothing bad going down. If ever we were Elvis's disciples, then it was during that time just before he married Priscilla. Priscilla seemed to love the action and she liked all the boys. In July 1961, Red married his wife, Pat. Elvis came to the wedding half an hour late, and even then, at the wedding, he came loaded up with 2 in his waistband. Red says, but we all thought it was a bit of a joke. Anything he did, we laughed at. Guns, the spending sprees never let up, with Presley always paying cash. His old man, Vernon, would just gasp when he got those bills. Elvis would laugh and say, hell, man, there is plenty more where that came from. 9.99. Unlike other entertainers, Presley made no fancy tax shelters for himself. He has always let the Internal Revenue Service work out his tax return, and is probably the biggest individual taxpayer in the country. Red recalls that Presley always marveled at the case of Joe Louis, the fighter who made millions of dollars and woke up one morning to find that not only was he flat broke, he owed the Internal Revenue Service a fortune. That ain't going to happen to me, man, Presley would always say. You must understand that while a big thing was made of Elizabeth Taylor getting $1 million, Elvis was getting that for most of the pictures he made, says Sonny. That money was just piling up there in the damn bank account into millions. Elvis could not spend it fast enough. A lot of the spending sprees would follow a pill-taking spree, says Red. It's like a compulsion burning away inside of him, as when Elvis began by buying a horse and ended up buying the ranch. When the boys weren't at Rising Sun or Graceland, they hung out with their boss in Hollywood while he was making films. In 1966, Presley took his gang to Los Angeles and rented a huge place on Rocca Place in Bel Air. Priscilla was living with him on and off between trips to Memphis. On one particular night, Sonny was driving Presley in his custom-made Rolls-Royce limousine. We were going back to Rocca Place and it was one of those beautiful nights, he says, warm and clear. Suddenly out of nowhere Elvis says, this would be a great night to be driving a convertible. Bang. That was it. Now, it was in his mind to buy a convertible there and then. He tells me to turn around and go over to the Hillcrest Motor Company on Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills. We get out and there's this beautiful solid black Cadillac convertible. Elvis had it in his mind that he wanted a baby blue one. The dealer didn't have one, but he referred us to another dealer, Lou Ellers, further down on Wilshire, near Fairfax. Elvis got out and walked to the sales office while I parked the car. When I parked the car, Elvis was coming out of the sales office, and he came up to me as I was passing this gleaming black Eldorado convertible. Elvis said to me, what do you think of that one, Sonny? And I said, God almighty, that is beautiful, that is beautiful. It was polished and gleaming in the night light, and I thought that was the one maybe he chose to buy. Then he walks over and hands me a set of keys and said, it's yours. I backed away and said, no way, boss, no way. Oh, no, I don't want you to do that. Elvis just kept on laughing and saying, come on, Sonny, I want to give it to you. I told him and I could hardly speak because I was getting emotional and there were tears in my eyes. I said, it seems like you're always giving things to us. We're always taking and never giving nothing back in return. He said, you're giving when you don't know you're giving. Giving. I have always had reports about you, Sonny, how you always speak up for me when I'm not around, and you never put me down. So I want you to have it, man. You deserve it. I ended up accepting it. It was a beautiful car. Elvis then canceled his baby blue convertible and got a solid black one instead. I guess a baby blue one would be nice, but a car should always be black or white. Elvis had got out of the pink stage and he only wanted blacks or whites. All the boys agreed with him, which was just as well, because the next day all hell broke loose again. He bought Red a black convertible Eldorado, Alan Fortas a white Cadillac convertible, Jerry Schilling a white Cadillac convertible, Larry Geller, the hairdresser, a white Cadillac convertible, Richard Davis, his valet, a white Cadillac convertible, Marty Lacker, who helped Joe Esposito as foreman of the gang, a four-door Cadillac sedan, and Joe Esposito, the only one who broke the black-white barrier, a maroon Cadillac convertible. Presley paid cash for them, and the gift taxes, giving them out as if he were giving away autographs. The next day at Rocca Place, Sonny remembers, was chaos. Everybody was talking about their cars. There were some tough guys up there, but I saw a tear of emotion in every one of those guys that next day. Now on this occasion I don't think it would be fair to say that Elvis gave out all those gifts because he was bombed on pills. It was a genuine, generous gesture, a beautiful gesture. I remember him saying, man, when we were all poor kids in Memphis, there wasn't one of us who didn't say that one day we would have a Cadillac convertible. It was our dream. Well, now we have our dream come true. When I think back to that, I still can choke up, because he was really giving, man. Before the Cadillacs were the motorcycles, and that meant everybody would go through the motorbike stage. He bought 12 in one order. The store was so astonished, they demanded a telephone number to call back to because they thought the order might have been a hoax. On top of the motorbikes, Presley also bought a customized Greyhound bus for all through this time. Of course, Priscilla Bewley was not only growing up, she was growing into a mature woman, and one who was not satisfied with being Elvis Presley's girlfriend. She wanted marriage. Her parents were calling Presley to ask politely if he intended to behave honorably in the situation. Colonel Tom Parker wasn't too happy, either. So far, he had manipulated the press beautifully, but how long would it last? For everyone's sake, Colonel Tom wanted his boy Elvis and Priscilla man and wife. Presley had a long string of romances with well-known and not so well-known actresses, and both Red and Sonny remember overhearing several heated scenes between Presley and Priscilla. Red says they had fights, like any normal couple, but she had a mind of her own. She had suspicions that he was running around with other women, but she never really caught him in the act. She was not going to be made a fool of, I can tell you. Sonny remembers a battle royal in the rented Bel Air home in Rock Place. It was about the same time that Elvis was buying us cars and things. I always got the feeling that in the early days, Priscilla didn't like us hanging around as much as we did. She never said anything, but I guess she had arguments along the line that he spent more time with the boys than with her. Anyway, this argument was a beauty. He was ranting and she was really screaming. We were about 3 bedrooms away, but you could hear furniture and things falling all over. Elvis comes out, and he is extremely calm for someone who has been ranting and raving. He said quietly, I just told her to pack all her stuff and get the fuck out. At this time he is helping her pack, throwing her clothes out of the closet onto the floor. Well, she is all packed and he walks in and says to her, now unpack. God damn it, you are not going anywhere. He told us later that women can get you by the balls, you know. He could make a person feel very insecure with that sort of stuff. He did it with us all the time, making you think that you were not in as tight as you might have thought you were. It was a reverse psychology thing. Both Red and Sonny believed that to some degree Presley was keeping Priscilla off balance so she would get acclimatized to the treatment when they got married. There is no doubt in either man's mind that Presley intended right along to get married, although, like most men in his situation, he was in no great hurry. The boys never really got close to Priscilla. Not that she was standoffish. She wasn't. She was extremely pleasant, but they respected her position, and also they didn't want to exaggerate their already noticeable presence to a woman who perhaps couldn't be blamed if she wanted more of Presley to herself. Besides, the boys were simply having too much fun. When Elvis first took over Graceland, says Red, there was a ritual that every New Year and every July 4th, he would put on these fireworks displays. Actually, they weren't so much displays as they were fireworks wars. 99. Presley would divide the boys up into 2 sides, dress them in gloves, football helmets and motorcycle helmets, set them about 20 yards from each other and let the fireworks fly. Red and Sonny marveled that nobody was ever seriously injured, because they would level arsenals of rockets and Roman candles at each other and blast away at point blank range for hours. I've backed into burning rockets and had my ass burned half off, Red says with a chuckle. I've seen Elvis bending over a giant rocket and the thing go off while he is leaning over it, nearly blowing his full head off. Sonny carries a scar on his chest to this day where one of us tried to blow a rocket through him. Roman candles would blow up in our hands. The house caught fire twice in these battles, and one time Sonny had to knock a wall down with a sledgehammer to get a hose to the fire. Vernon Presley would look on with some misgivings, to put it mildly. He would just gasp with horror at our antics, says Red. But Elvis was just having fun. Whatever would happen, he would say, give Daddy the bill, and there would be poor old Vernon going white. Old Vernon can be pretty tight with a buck, whereas Elvis just never thought about the price of anything. It was hilarious to see Vernon clap his hands to his head when he saw the spending and the damage in the waste and say, oh, lordy. He could be a very funny dude without trying. On one particular fireworks night, when everybody, including Priscilla, was standing around the kitchen, Vernon was the star of the show. Red recalls that Presley had bought little explosive pellets. They were things that you threw on the ground and they would explode, or you would put them under someone's feet, and when they stamped on them, they would explode. Well, anyway, Vernon comes into the kitchen, and there is a little bowl of these things sitting on the table. Sonny continues, well, now these things, I guess, in all these different colors look a little like M&M candies. Anyway, Vernon is standing there and talking to us important like and reaches behind him. He was making some serious point, and he threw them in his mouth, thinking they were candies. Well, man, you should have seen it. He chomped down on these little bitty things, and they exploded in his mouth. Man, the look on his face, he didn't know what was happening to him. First this explosion inside his head, and there is smoke boiling out of his mouth. He could not speak, his lips had been numbed by the shock, and he still doesn't know what he did wrong to deserve all this. When we found he wasn't hurt bad, just in shock, we died laughing. I mean, right to this day when I picture that scene I nearly collapse. Vernon used to tell that story, and when he told it, it was even funnier. You know, that night he stood next to that bull the entire evening trying to get someone else to fall for it. But nobody did. The fireworks wars, like the fairground and the skating rink, were opportunities to play out teenage fantasies that Presley could never afford when he was younger. One such fantasy, according to Red, is the compulsion to knock something down or smash it to pieces. I remember after we all moved out to Graceland and to the farm across the Mississippi border, there was a nice, neat wooden house, 3 bedrooms, built into the northeast corner of Graceland. This is where his uncle Travis Smith, the gatekeeper, used to live. Well, as soon as Elvis got these trailers for everybody, he just got it into his mind that he was going to wipe the cottage off the face of the earth. There was no reason to, because it was a real nice house, but Elvis said it had to go. 99. The morning after the decision was made, Presley mounted his small bulldozer, but it was obvious that it couldn't do the job, so he hired a full-size construction bulldozer. Red recalls, I got in the little one and Elvis got atop of the big one. He put a football helmet on for protection. I remember this day because Vernon Presley was sitting on the porch in a rocking chair dozing off. Elvis starts up the bulldozer and yells out to Vernon, "You better move, Daddy." Vernon asks why and Elvis says, "Because I'm going to knock the goddamn house down." Once again, Vernon gives one of those looks like, "Oh, Lordy," but he doesn't say anything. He knows too well for that now, so he just gets up and Elvis starts roaring away. We also lit the house and it was blazing like hell and he just bores into it, destroys it. At one time I was in the little bulldozer and he was in the big one, and I looked behind and the son of a bitch is pushing me into the burning house while I'm on this little bulldozer. He was laughing his ass off. He was having a great time. Anyway, in less than an hour we have just knocked the whole superstructure down to where it drops right into the basement and it's burning up a storm. As the thing is going up in smoke, we hear a fire engine, and the next thing, this fireman sticks his head over the fence and asks what in hell's name we think we're doing. Elvis looks up at him with a look on his face which says it was a damn fool question to ask and says, "We're burning down a house." And the guy says, "How did you do that?" And Elvis says, "With a damn match." Now the fireman wants to know why Elvis hadn't informed the fire department about our little fire, and Elvis ends the argument by telling him, "Fuck you." That was the end of the house and the argument. He had satisfied his fantasy. Dave Hebler recalls that Presley had told him many times of a similar fantasy. He told me that one thing he would really like is to get one of those big cranes with a big wrecking ball and just demolish a giant building. He really wants the power to build and to destroy at his whim. In Hollywood mansions, movie locations, Graceland and the big spread in Mississippi, Presley and the Memphis Mafia were acting out the childhood dreams that they had nurtured for years. Finally there was money, homes, horses, cars, tractors, fireworks and guns to make it all a reality. There were very few crosswords, and everyone got along as one happy family. Presley did have his outbursts of temper and his eccentricities, but what superstar, then or now, did not? Looming on the horizon, however, was the inevitable marriage. Colonel Bewley and Colonel Parker were to get their way. For Red West, the marriage triggered the first real rift between him and Presley. It was between the movies Clam Bake and Speedway. And I was living in Beverly Glen in Los Angeles, says Red. I was doing stunts and fight scenes in the movies for Elvis when we were told about the wedding. As always in these things, there was a meeting, and I was called at my house and we were all told to get ready to go to Las Vegas for the wedding. We all flew down, together with Marty Lacker and Joe Esposito, who were handling the business side of movies for Elvis, Lamar, Charlie Hodge, Gene Smith, Richard Davis, Vernon and Dee. We all check into the Aladdin Hotel in Vegas. I brought my wife, Pat, along too. Anyway, we were sitting around waiting for the call from Joe Esposito, who was in touch with the colonel, who was making the arrangements. I'm sitting in my room and there is nothing happening. No telephone calls, nothing. So I go down to Joe Esposito's room, knock on the door, and he opens the door and he is all dressed up in his tux. I ask Joe what's going on. How come nobody has told me what time we're going to the wedding? Now Joe looks like he has swallowed a frog, and he tells me, "You all aren't going to the wedding. You're going to go to the reception. Marty and I will be there, but you will all be at the reception." I blew my fucking stack. I just went ape. I didn't care who heard me. I was really pissed off. The man brings us all the way to Las Vegas, and then we are told that we are not invited to the wedding. I suspected Joe and the colonel had fixed this up, and Elvis wasn't being thoughtful enough to make sure what is going on. Boy, was I mad. I went back to the room and told Pat, and she broke down and cried. It was the thought of it. Man, I wasn't interested in going to a reception. I wanted to be there at the time he was getting married. I thought we were that close. I thought we loved each other. I had tears in my eyes and I was very emotional. I just stayed in the damn room and heard about the marriage on television. They were married by a Supreme Court justice in a room at the Aladdin. What a kick in the teeth. I didn't go near the reception. As it turned out, I just wanted to get straight back on a plane to Los Angeles. As a matter of fact, I didn't even have any money on me. so I had to borrow $50 from a Memphis jeweler who had come down to lay on the ring. As it happened, the plane I got was the same flight that the rest of the wedding party caught. I didn't say 2 words to anybody. Vern and Dee were on the plane and we didn't even exchange a glance. As it turned out, I just ignored Elvis for a month or so. He had got on another plane owned and piloted by Danny Kaye, the comedian. They went to Palm Springs for their honeymoon. Joe Esposito and Marty Lacker were Elvis's best men. I have nothing against either of those guys, but right then I felt like decking them. I couldn't help feel there was something behind it. Somehow, I couldn't help feel there was some kind of a conspiracy behind the whole thing. I don't know who did it. All I know, I was very hurt. Sonny was in Los Angeles at the time working on a movie, and I know he felt it was a pretty lousy deal. You know, coming from the South and seeing as how I thought I was important to Elvis, it was a big thing in my life. It was like not getting invited to your brother's wedding. I was sullen for a few days, and I called Charlie Hodge at the hotel where they were all staying. Charlie had joined up with Elvis by now and I'm on the phone saying, "Who organized the damn thing? What went on?" Anyway, Charlie don't know nothing, but Elvis is sitting there while I'm talking and he gets on the phone. "What the hell's going on, boy?" He starts in like that, and I yell back at him, "What the fuck you mean, boy?" We were at each other, and after a while we both calmed down and we agreed to cool it and talk again later. It was then that I did a stint working stunts on Bob Conrad's television show Wild West, but it all blew over and we got together after that. I was back on the payroll. In those days, in 1967, I guess I was making about $250 a week with Elvis. After leaving Palm Springs, Presley decided to go to the Bahamas to extend the honeymoon. He thought it would be like another Las Vegas, but when he got there he didn't like it. He was particularly disturbed at what he believed was the tense racial situation. So he went on to Hawaii with Priscilla and Joe Esposito and Jerry Schilling. Presley had wanted to go to Europe, but the Colonel dissuaded him, because he did not want to take the luster off Presley should he ever do a tour of Europe. So far, that has not happened. While in Hawaii, they attended a big karate tournament organized by Ed Parker, with whom Dave Hebler worked in the art. In the competition was a young man who was born in the islands, the champion karate expert for his height. He was a handsome, smiling young man, quiet in his manner, who stood 5'11" and weighed about 175 pounds. His name was Mike Stone. Presley met him and congratulated him on his fine performance at the exhibition. After his marriage, Presley, while affectionate and attentive, did everything possible to keep Priscilla away from his immediate places of work. She would come on location from time to time during his movies, but the handsome young superstar had a lot of extracurricular activities to take care of. There was a romance, both light and heavy, on virtually every film that Presley made. He would give the girls the cold shoulder whenever Priscilla was around, says Sonny, and he gave Priscilla a lot of respect. But there is no doubt that Elvis wanted to have his cake and eat it, too. In the beginning of Las Vegas and the tours, often the wives would be along. For instance, in Vegas on, say, a 4-week engagement, the wives would come down for the opening weekend and then every weekend until he closed. Perhaps, they would stay around relaxing for a few days after the close, too. Priscilla was there with the wives and girlfriends. They were around quite a bit, but toward the end of their marriage, 1971 to 1972, Elvis cut it down just so the wives and girlfriends were there at opening and closing. Then he cut it down to the opening, and there were times when he wouldn't bring Priscilla out at all. When Priscilla didn't come, neither did the other wives and girlfriends. No woman, no matter who she is married to, is going to take that. There were times when he wouldn't see her for maybe 7 weeks. How can a marriage last through that? It was a strain on the other guys, too. Joe Esposito's marriage broke up. So did Jerry Schilling's. I'm not saying they wouldn't have broken up anyway, but that separation had to contribute to it. I know that in 1975 my wife, Judy, and I separated. It was my own damn fault for just neglecting her. Elvis used to say to us, "You got to get away from your wives and kids now and then." But none of us wanted to. Priscilla was gradually getting more and more annoyed. He kept her in a doll's house, an ivory tower. He didn't want her hanging around the movie locations, because he heard that Hal Wallace, the man who produced most of his movies, had said that he would offer her a movie contract anytime she wanted it. Presley, according to the West Boys, did not like that talk. He didn't want his wife to have any career. A woman's place was in the home looking after her men when he was home. Sonny reports that Presley and the ones around him who weren't married took every opportunity to take advantage of their special position in the show business hierarchy. Oh, hell, man, before I got married, I was into all that running around with Elvis. We had girls coming out of our ears. It's not very hard when you say you work for Elvis. God, the offers I got from women were incredible, and sure, I took advantage of it all. Priscilla knew Elvis was playing around, and she knew the boys were playing around also. I remember one time, in 1970, we had a bunch of girls down at his place in Palm Springs. After about 3 or 4 days of this carrying on together, we split to Las Vegas. Now Priscilla and one of the wives went down there for a few days a week or so later, and naturally, like all women, they go through the mail. First of all, there was a letter to Elvis saying thanks for the great 3 days. It was great. Let's do it again sometime. Well, there is a similar note left for me. Something like let's do it again, and it was signed Lizard Tongue. Well, Priscilla got on the telephone and crawled all over Elvis, and she wanted to know who Lizard Tongue was. There were so many girls around then, I'm damned if I remember who it was who was supposed to be Lizard Tongue. Elvis was laughing his head off, but when Priscilla started to crawl over him, he got right back at her and turned it around where she was almost apologizing for calling him. He told her that she should be more intelligent to take anything like that seriously with all the crazy fan mail he gets. I don't really know whether she believed it, but what I do know is that after I got married she told the story back to my wife, Judy, and intimated that we were all screwing around when we were on tour. For quite a while that put a bit of a strain between Priscilla and me. I didn't want her causing that kind of trouble. Also Judy, my wife, was under pressure. Whenever a new girlfriend or wife came into the crowd, a couple of the other women in the group were always putting them to the test. What they wanted to know was whether Judy loved me or was she just in the group to try and get to Elvis. I mean, Judy respected Elvis and everything, thought he was a great showman and a good guy, but that sort of stuff was ridiculous. When we were living in the same home as Elvis in Los Angeles on Montevideo Road, there was quite a bit of tension between Priscilla and Judy. One day I'm with Elvis, I think we were at the doctor's together. Anyway, we get this call and they're at each other's throats. Priscilla is threatening to use karate on Judy, and Judy is yelling that she doesn't care. Go ahead and try it. So we raced up there to calm them down. Elvis thought it was pretty funny. It was just a case of two women being in the same house. Later on, after Priscilla left Elvis, she sort of apologized for the way she acted toward Judy. We realized that Priscilla was under a lot of pressure too. In January of 1972, Presley was halfway through his act at the Hilton International Hotel showroom, when he took a break to introduce some members of the audience, among whom was a rich and respected record producer. Let's call him Bill Heck, which is not his real name. With him, acting as bodyguard companion, was a handsome, built Hawaiian. His name was Mike Stone. Presley remembered him from Ed Parker's tournament in Hawaii, where he and Priscilla had been on their honeymoon. Presley gave him a lavish introduction and said with a smile of affection, "This man is the world champion bad guy. He is one of the greatest karate talents in the world. There is nobody like him." Later Heck and Mike Stone came backstage. In Presley's dressing room were Red West, Sonny, Lamar, Presley, Priscilla and a few members of the band. The record producer, says Sonny, was a weasel. He kept on boasting that he had the baddest bodyguard in the world, and he is kind of trying to build himself up on Mike's reputation. He's telling everybody that Mike Stone is a real killer. Mike is sitting there very quiet, and you could see this sort of talk is embarrassing the hell out of him. Everybody in the room was embarrassed. Red and Sonny felt like throwing Heck through a wall. Presley finally cut off the conversation by saying with a smile, "Karate don't beat a gun, man." Mike Stone smiled politely and agreed, "You're right." After a while Mr. Heck seemed to be aware that he was not welcome and left. The boys and Presley cornered Mike and started to talk enthusiastically about karate. Presley mentioned that he wanted Priscilla to learn karate, and in a loose sort of way it was agreed that Mike would give Priscilla lessons at the studio of Chuck Norris, a known owner of a big chain of karate studios. Presley invited Stone up to the Hilton with some other karate experts, and they showed some films of a tournament in Japan. Throughout all these meetings, Stone was the essence of quiet humility. Occasionally he talked to Priscilla, and within about 3 weeks she became his karate student. Once or twice Stone dropped by the house while he was giving her karate lessons, but, Red recalls, there was nothing in his behavior to suggest a romance. Sonny says that all the meetings seemed very innocent, but, he adds philosophically, apparently at one stage or the other the karate lessons got a bit out of hand. For his part, Presley had every reason to trust Priscilla. She had never given him the slightest cause for suspicion. Once, when he was on location for a movie, Priscilla had been taking modern dance lessons from a male dance teacher. It was a completely innocent association, but somehow a private detective close to the Presley camp took it upon himself to report to a Presley attorney that Priscilla was leaving the dance instructor's home in the early hours of the morning. The attorney reported this to Joe Esposito, who in turn faithfully relayed the information to Presley. The West boys recall that Presley exploded. "He crawled all over Joe," says Sonny, although Joe had nothing to do with it. He told Joe to tell the lawyer to keep his nose out of his wife's affairs and stop spying on her. Both West boys recall that Presley was secure in his trust. The first hint that romance was blooming between Priscilla and Mike Stone came to Red from the maids. I just started hearing a lot of shit. Nothing straight out, but they were kind of letting me know that they had seen Mike up at the house a lot more than we figured. Red was certain they were having a romance and even bet Joe Esposito $100 to back up his theory. He won the bet. Sunny was the next to get the drift of what was going on between them. Sometime after she started taking lessons from Mike Stone, she went off to Chuck Norris's studio one afternoon for her usual lesson. Anyway, that afternoon, Elvis wanted her for something and told me to get hold of her. We called Chuck's studio and she wasn't there. We were told she went to a karate tournament. We rang the place where the tournament was held and she wasn't there either. I had a feeling that it was about to come out. I told Elvis we couldn't get hold of her because Chuck's line was busy. I was just playing for time. I didn't want to be the one to start any trouble. Anyway, a little later the red light goes on in the main room of the house at Monovale Road. That meant somebody was at the gate. I figured it was Priscilla. So I beat everyone out there so I could tell her what was going down, sort of prepare a story, I suppose. I got to the gate, poked my head inside the car window and said, "Elvis has been trying to find you." We called Chuck Norris's place and there was no answer. Take it from there. She didn't say anything to me, but she got the message. She went into the den and he said, "Where you been, Nungan?" That was his nickname for her. She just said, "Oh, I went to a karate tournament." He didn't question her and that was it. I think she saw right then that us guys were pretty loyal to her and weren't about to go tattletaling. She knew that we understood what she had been going through. He wasn't spending any time with her at all. To Priscilla's credit, she was not going to have a romance behind Presley's back. Soon after, it was evident to the boys that she was close to Mike Stone. They remember the night in Las Vegas when she finally told him that it was all over between them. Red recalls, "We weren't there, of course, but it appears she told him between shows at the Hilton." Priscilla and the wives, my wife, Pat, was there. Were having dinner at Leonardo's, the Italian restaurant at the Hilton. I was with E up in his room. He just told go down and get Priscilla. I went down and told her Elvis wanted to see her. Whatever happened up there? Priscilla later told my wife, Pat, that he made love to her, very forcefully. He took her right on the spot when he knew another man was in the picture. Me. After the show, Presley gathered the Memphis Mafia around him, Red, Sonny, Lamar, Charlie Hodge, Joe Esposito. It was a summit meeting. He told them, "Well, another man has taken my wife." Everybody was quite shocked at his direct speech. There was silence in the room. Red thought back to a time when Priscilla had asked Presley that she be allowed to come to Las Vegas more often to be with him, and Presley had said to Red, "I wish she would find someone else to mess around with and quit bugging me." 99 With that thought in mind, he tried now to save Presley's face a little in front of the boys. He said, "Hell, man, ain't that what you wanted?" Presley replied somberly, "Not that way, man, not that way." The meeting broke up quietly and Presley went to bed. Both West boys believe it took a lot of courage for Priscilla to tell Presley that she was leaving him for another man when she could have cheated on Presley indefinitely without anybody giving her away. She could have screwed around on him, says Sonny. "I remember one night I came back from Las Vegas unexpectedly and was at the house. She came in and was shocked to see me. I looked outside and Mike Stone was driving her Mercedes. Priscilla was a bit embarrassed and said, 'You remember Mike, don't you?' We shook hands. She knew that I knew she was going with Mike, and she knew I hadn't informed on her, so she was secure. If she had wanted, she could have kept up that double life as long as she liked, but she was upfront about it. She didn't want to make a fool of Elvis. I liked her for that. Actually, although Priscilla had told Presley she was leaving him and that another man was involved with her, she did not say who the man was. Red remembers one time when he was talking to Presley about the problem of the split in his marriage. He was sort of thinking of where he went wrong, says Red. Her leaving him really shook him up. Believe me, he was saying to me, "Man, I tried to give her all the freedom I could. Sometimes a man and a woman have to have their own lives. I gave her all the time she wanted. I encouraged her to take those karate lessons from Mike Stone and everything." 9.39 It was then that Red looked quizzically at his boss. "Man," he said, "don't you know that Mike Stone is the guy she is seeing?" Presley paled and was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Goddamn." He was the last one to know. Later that year, in 1972, they officially separated, and in 1973, after a generous settlement, they got a divorce in Santa Monica court. Presley left the divorce proceedings with his arm around her. Many people believe that Priscilla and Presley are still very much in love. Nobody knows except the parties involved. But it just might be true.